Well, people have this misconception of power. They think it has to do with, CEOs and presidents, and it's kind of ugly and dirty. I have a much different conception of it. It's something that has to do with your daily life. Now, I have the idea that much in our lives we cannot control. You can throw a number out, 95%. You can't control disease. You can't control the people that you meet. It's by chance that you met your wife and you fell in love and you ended up marrying her. You kind of fall into jobs. There's much in life that is way beyond your control, but there's a margin that you can control, right? And it's mostly about your relationships. It has to do with your children, your spouse, your partners, your colleagues at work, your bosses. And the feeling that you have no control over them, that they can do whatever they want, that you have an idea and you want to sell it to them, or you want somebody to stop their annoying behavior and you can't control them, they're completely oblivious, they won't listen to anything you say, is to me the worst feeling for a human being to have, right? We're animals that need that sense of I can influence my environment. I can influence the people around me. And the sense of helplessness is a very, very primal feeling. It's like when you take an animal, I don't know if you have dogs or cats, and you put them on their belly, they feel exposed, they feel terrified, and that's when they attack you. Well, that position is like being on our belly. I can't control my teenage son. He's into drugs. My husband or my wife isn't listening to me. My boss is doing, you want the ability to be able to at least defend yourself or to have some influence or power over them. It's a small margin because there's much you can't control, but to the degree that you can have some of that power and then there's one other aspect, probably the most important aspect that I'm forgetting here, is power over yourself, self-mastery, right? Because a lot of the problems that you have in life, you can't really control yourself. You're subject to all these emotions, these moods, these things that grab you, that obsess you, that possess you. Your mind has these recurrent thoughts. You have no self-control, and it drives you crazy. You have a habit you want to get rid of. You take some program, some class, and 3 months later, you're back at it. What is it? So the sense that you can control yourself to a degree, and the sense that you can have some influence over people is power. And the more you have it, the greater the feeling you have, because you can avoid that helplessness that makes all of us kind of crazy.
Yeah, I really love how you grounded that definition of power in self-mastery, because that seems to be where everything else loses control. It's like if we're out of control, then everything seems out of control. And so much of our lust or envy or greed or anger has the ability to distract and derail us completely when there's no self-power.
Right.
And why do you think it is? You mentioned that. Why do you think it is that we all have, and I can relate to this, and I think, when you referred to yourself as someone who struggled and, couldn't figure it out and was surprised by what happened. And, I would say the same, that, I grew up being bullied for being overweight, and I was one of few Indian people in my entire area that I grew up in London.
Where in London?
I was in North London, so majority area of Tottenham and Wood Green, which are not considered South Asian areas generally. And when I look back at that time in my life, I also feel like at one point in my life, was an underdog. And why do you think it is that so many underdogs have such a negative view of power? I feel like so many people today, whether they consider themselves underdogs or not, when we think of words like power or influence, we think of them as negative things. We think of them as being, as you said, like dirty or toxic or plagued. Why is that? And how do you healthily transform your belief around power?
Well, that was sort of what I wrote the book about, but a lot of it comes from our culture, which I think plays very often a very negative role in our lives. It teaches us the wrong kinds of lessons. And so back in the days when it was television, now it's whatever you watch in whatever medium, all of the villains in the world were these power-hungry people in black coats with cars with the windows kind of blacked out, and doing all sorts of evil, ugly things. That's what we think of as power. It's like a cultural trope that we've all digested, this kind of Machiavellian character who's out to kind of destroy people. Nobody thinks of power in a positive sense. And it's maddening. It drives me crazy. It's incredibly hypocritical when self-help books are written and they're trying to say that power or ambition or influence are ugly things. When the writer himself or herself is actually a very powerful person who has influence, who has control, it's awful. It drove me crazy. It's why I wrote the book, So I try and tell people, look, who's one of the great saints that we hold up in our culture? Mahatma Gandhi, right? I certainly venerate him. He's an amazing person. And I read very deeply about Gandhi, and I wrote about him in my third book, The Strategies of War. And his goal was to throw the English out of India so they could finally experience independence, because the people had been subjugated for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be human in a way, right? A very noble goal. But he realized quickly on how difficult it would be. So he had to be strategic. And so he had things like the Salt March, where he very much plotted in advance that he knew, using his method of civil disobedience, where once the police came out, you were not to fight, you were to accept them. If they beat you, you accepted it. You never fought, no violence. But he knew that back in the day before television, that the media, the newspapers would cover their English bobbies or whomever they were beating these people up. And it would play horribly in England because people in England thought that they were very liberal and open-minded, that they weren't these horrifying imperialists. He was strategic. He knew that he had to get maximum publicity for very ugly confrontations. Years later, Martin Luther King, another icon who also practiced civil disobedience, utilized the same tactics in his campaigns in Selma and Montgomery. At one point, it was very controversial. He had children of the ages 13, 14 involved in this march, and that they would get beaten up. People were in his group castigated for this. How could you be like that? He knew that that would play on television now to the white audiences around America. They'd be horrified. If you want power in this world, if you are fighting for a cause, if you want some kind of justice, you have to be strategic. You have to think like that. You have to think in terms of power. People just don't give themselves up. If we have the Me Too movement now, men are not just going to give up all of their control in a place like Hollywood. You have to hit them. You have to be strong. You have to be forceful. It's a power game. And I can't stand people who are naive, who think that just being themselves, just being virtuous is going to get what they want in life. If you're going to fight for something, you have to be able to meet the enemy on their terms of power. So that's sort of how I like to explain to him. There's nothing unhealthy about Gandhi or MLK as far as I know.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I definitely feel very aligned with that. I've often said to people when people have asked me, like, Jay, how have you created what you've created, or how are you building your work and businesses? And I've always said that, to me, sincerity and strategy have to go together.
Sure.
That data and intuition have to go together. Like, you can't have one or the other. And so to only be sincere and loving and compassionate and kind, well, actually a lot may not happen. And to only be strategic and influential and
Definitely.
Powerful, you may end up
lose your soul.
Lose your soul. Exactly. Well, beautifully said. Like, you lose your soul. But when you have two together, and it is a fine balance, and you're always juggling both, and you don't get the perfect amount. You're always in percentages and proportions. But the idea that you can't ignore this side. There's a beautiful quote you reminded me of from Martin Luther King, where he said, those who love peace need to learn to organize themselves as well as those who love war.
Right.
And I think that's
beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're saying, and that's what I saw when I first started to share the messages I'd learned from living as a monk and the Vedas and that tradition. For me, it was, if I'm not strategic about this, or if I'm not focused or organized about this,
right,
then I might as well give up now.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to spread itself.
No.
And so I'm really happy to hear your perspective on that. How do the laws become things that you use versus getting lost in what we just said of losing your soul in power now driving you? Because I almost feel like when you start using the laws, you end up feeling a sense of power, and then that power can consume you often. It can become toxic. Some people start that way. They start with an agenda and they utilize the powers wrongly. But what to speak of someone who starts off in a more noble cause, but then now the laws are using them versus them using the laws.
Well, you have to understand there's an offensive and a defensive side to the laws, okay? And I always tell people who have these kind of compunctions about crush your enemy totally, I don't want to do that. Well, neither do I, okay? So if you're reading a law and it kind of triggers this, I can't do that, then it's not something you should do anyway. It's not gonna fit your way of doing it. You have a certain style, a certain belief system, certain values. I'm not telling you to go outside your values, but look at that law, which is probably the ugliest in the whole book, crush your enemy totally, and understand that in the business world, that law prevails 95% of the time. When a company like Google or any tech company has an enemy, their goal is to get rid of them completely, to buy them out so they have no competitors, right? Look at Amazon, but even smaller businesses dealing with rivals. It's a dynamic in the business world. So you need to be aware of it and not be naive. You don't have to practice it, but you need to be aware of it. Other laws are just simply trying to show you we're animals that kind of base our opinions a lot on what we see and perceive. We don't often think too deeply. We kind of take people based on their appearances. So there's a law of power in there called always say less than necessary. Very kind of common sense law. And the idea is that if you're in a meeting with people, that man or woman who talks less generally has an aura of power, particularly a boss. They seem enigmatic, mysterious. And when they do something, say something, everybody's hanging on their words. What did that mean? What did it say? Whereas people who talk a lot give the impression that they're weak. They signal weakness. They can't control themselves. So they can't control themselves. How can they control anything in the business world, right? So we sense that in people. So be aware of that. You're probably talking too much in a lot of circumstances, and maybe you can control that. And so this is kind of a way of defending yourself in an environment where people will tend to see you as weak if you can't have any self-control, right? So if you see that a law that's ugly, that makes you skin crawl, you don't want to do it, I have no problem with that. There are a lot of laws I don't practice in there. But you need to be aware of them. You need to be aware that other people are practicing them so that you don't become their victim. Then there are other laws that, yes, you should practice, right? Like appealing to people's self-interest when you're trying to influence them, or despise the free lunch, where you learn to pay for things and be generous with your time and your money for people. So it depends on the law. But I hate it when people say, oh, what an evil book. Those are people who haven't read it, because half the laws, or more than half, have nothing evil about them. And the other half are about opening your eyes. I never say you have to practice this. I'm just making you aware of reality of what goes on in the world.
Is it possible to, and I agree with you fully. I think if you read the book, you can't see it as an evil book or a controlling or manipulative book at all. And you can tell clearly it's not your intention. It's not who you are. And that's what I want to ask you. How much of a role does intention play in some of this work? Because I wonder if you thought about that when you were writing it. Do you think about it now in terms of how your intention fits in with a law, or your reason why you're doing it, the cause behind the law that you're using? Does that impact or affect the quality of the effectiveness of the law? Does it make a law work better? Does it have any power? Does intention have any power?
You mean if your intention is for something good or for something evil?
Correct.
Well, it depends. Unfortunately, in the world today, and I've had this experience and we read about it in the news, a lot of people who have a dark side, whom we might consider rather immoral in their behavior, get pretty damn far, right?
Yeah.
And they use these laws and they don't pay any consequences. So there's no kind of ultimate justice in this world, although there might be in a religious sense. I don't deny that at all. But in a secular world, there's no consequences to pay for it. So people, if they have a law, they do crush your enemy totally, and that's their goal, they might end up being even better at it than somebody who doesn't really want to go there, but then kind of tries it half-heartedly, right? So I'm not here to say that justice and goodness always prevails, but the people who have those kind of intentions, the true sharks in the world, they don't need my book, right? They know it. It's in their DNA. They grew up at the age of 5 or 6, 7. It's already been implanted in them. And I write about that in my last book, The Laws of Human Nature. You can see that in certain people at a very early age. The great therapist, psychoanalyst Melanie Klein identified the greedy baby at the age of 6 months.
Wow.
That was already sucking so hard on the mother's breast. And she saw that this type of baby turned into the type that was actually very aggressive in life. So it's inbred very early on. People like that have patterns of behavior they cannot control. But those people with those kind of intentions who are very manipulative, I believe very firmly ultimately they hit a wall. They piss so many people off. They don't know the soft side of power. They have no self-control because all they know is grab, 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 push, push, push. They don't know when to yield. They don't know when to step back, right? They've only learned one way. And so that becomes their downfall.
What I'm hearing from you is that the intention, it's in one sense, could weaken it if it wasn't used effectively. But, you're also saying that if someone does have a positive intention or a good intention, then it is likely that they may be happier with that power to some degree.
Definitely. Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And I think that's what I find so fascinating.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Right? It's the relationship. I guess we both know a lot of powerful people who would consider themselves to be not happy.
Yeah.
And I ask myself then, what is the role of power in the world? Because I feel like a lot of people in your situation, when they didn't feel any power at home or they didn't feel a sense of significance at home, often power or significance become pursuits for pleasure and for happiness. But power doesn't lead to happiness. What does power lead to?
Well, I'm not sure I completely agree with that because under the way I've defined power, where you feel like, okay, so let's say you have a spouse who has a very annoying pattern of behavior, all right? And in my books, I train you, being direct and yelling at them never works, never works.
Yes.
You have to learn the art of insinuation, of persuasion, which often is stepping back, which often involves teaching them a lesson, mirroring their behavior, right? And so your intention is not ugly or bad. It's that you can't live with this person unless they alter their behavior, right? And so you think about it, you strategize a little bit, you take some steps, and it works.
Yes, got it.
Right?
I understand, yes.
So in a relationship, often that, can spell into some degree of power. Or let's say you're in a nasty divorce case, and there's a child involved, and your emotions are to screw that man or woman who's so mean to you, and you're going to have this nasty fight, and then you realize, oh my God, this child that I love is really going to suffer from it. And then you step back and you go, no, I have to not just react. It's going to lead to an uglier cycle of battles. I need to be a little bit more strategic about this. I need to pursue this in a softer way, right? And so you end up feeling better about yourself. So I'm not saying all of the laws are going to make you feel better about yourself, but the degree that you can control your environment where you're not helpless at work or in a relationship or with your children will give you a degree of happiness. It won't fulfill you the way, maybe that's the difference here. It will give you a sense of satisfaction. It will relieve that anxiety. It won't make you fulfilled the way your career will if it's done properly, but it will help you lose that continual gnawing anxiety that you can't change people, that you can't change yourself. So I do think there is an element of happiness, however you want to define involved with power.
No, and I think that's why, going back to your definition of power, and that's why I asked you that early on, that's exactly it. That when I was referring to my point, I was saying that when people have a negative intention and their definition of power is warped, then power can end up feeling dissatisfying when you get there because it didn't really get you what you wanted.
Right.
Because you couldn't force someone to love you, or you couldn't force this person. But actually, when it was done in the way you're saying, like when you realize that actually if I don't exert this power, I'm actually using this power to save this situation, to enable this situation to improve. I think that's I think that's what I was pointing to. And so we're on the same page. There's a couple of laws that I love that I wanted to pick out for you, so to just mention a bit, because I think these are Really, really interesting. So this one is Law 29, plan all the way to the end.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you how one actually does that. And I know you talk about in the book, which I want to say for people, but for today's conversation, I'd love to know, how do you plan to the end when sometimes it's really hard to know what's next and what the end is? And I think so many people today are, in jobs for less time. They're moving quicker. There's so many more opportunities, new technologies. What does it mean to plan to the end?
Well, it's a thought process. So as you point out well enough, that things come up that you can't foresee, circumstances, things change, and the ending that you plan for doesn't happen the way you want it to. That's fine. But to the degree that you go through a mental process and you think about the ending and you have a goal in mind, you're going to be much more effective in life. So when something comes up, you're planning to go here and it forces you that way, you're better prepared to take that circumstance and make it maybe veer a little closer to the point that you want, right? So the main point of that law is that we are all go around with these dreams and these thoughts and these plans that are so vague. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to direct a movie. I'm going to start a tech startup that's going to make billions of dollars, blah, blah, blah. And then we maybe go through a kind of half-hearted process. Yeah, my book's going to be about this. Yeah, my business will be like that, right? And then you don't really plan deeply enough. You don't think, because your plans are infected with wishes,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And to me, the kind of the model of that is the invasion of Iraq by all of these extremely prudent, strategic men like Dick Cheney, etc. They thought that we would be greeted as liberators with people with flowers in their hand, and then lo and behold, whoa! This nasty, nasty war in which hundreds of thousands of people are killed ensued. They didn't realize that their plans were infected with their dreams, with what I call the rosy scenario. So when you're going to go sell this movie that you want to, you're imagining that people already love it. You've already convinced yourself, but you don't realize that people are cold, they're indifferent. So if you plan to the end, you think about the goal, you think about the other people, you think about steps A, B, C, D, E to get there. You're more concrete. And then when things come up, as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get hit in the face, right? Okay, you get hit in the face. Yeah, all right, I got to change my plan a little bit.
Yes.
You're able to adapt. But if you're not thinking clearly about the end, you're in deep, deep doo-doo.
Yes.
That book will never get written. Or if you do start it, no one's going to be interested in it, etc. You have to plan more deeply. Mm-hmm. And the closer you can visualize the ending and be realistic, the greater your chances of success. That's sort of the meaning behind it.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I think we've almost lost that ability today. I mean, I rarely hear that. And that's why I wanted to pick that one, because I feel like today, and I guess I could see you nodding for anyone who's not watching the podcast right now. I'm seeing Ro. It's the idea. We've lost that today. There's so much of like, oh, well, just try this for a second and try this for a moment and give this a go. And it's almost like when you're so right. Not only do you not get it done, I feel like the hurdles seem much bigger.
Yeah.
Because you just didn't comprehend them.
Right.
But today when people would argue, and that's what I'm intrigued, I would love to hear your opinion. A lot of people would say, but Robert, if I comprehend them, then I just get disenthused or I feel limited and I just feel like it's overwhelming.
Discouraged.
Discouraged. That's the word I was looking for. Yes. Discouraged. I feel so discouraged and overwhelmed and it's too much for me. So how do you think about the end, but avoid that feeling? Well, I guess you can't avoid that feeling, but you work through it.
Well, I mean, do you want just the dream? Do you just want the vision of the great thing you're going to achieve, or do you want the reality? Right? And so, if you're going to, let's say you want to write a book. I know that's very lazy of me because that's what I do.
Well, I'm writing my second book right now, so this will be very helpful for me.
All right. It's a pretty enormous thing usually. I mean, if you're somewhat ambitious, right?
Yeah.
It's going to involve a lot of work and thinking and planning, right? But if you overdo the thinking, if you think about it, every little thing is planned ahead of time, then the process kind of loses its joy and its excitement. Mm-hmm. It seems overplanned, right? But you want to have a vision whenever I start a book, I have an overall vision of what I want the reader to feel from it, what I want them to learn from it, right? Okay. And so then I plot very carefully the ways to get there. But yeah, it's going to take 3 or 4 years. Yeah, it's overwhelming. Yeah, it's daunting. So what you do is you back off and you create little micro goals. So I have planning all the way to the end means to the end of July, right?
Yes.
I'm going to plan to the end of July. And by July 31st, I am going to have written 10 pages. I'm going to have done this chapter. I'm done this research. Then maybe then it doesn't seem quite so daunting. And then you can maybe extend it out a few more months. And lo and behold, the little baby steps you take, you're suddenly halfway there. Wow, it's really not as difficult as I thought. So you break it down. People, it just drives me crazy, can only think in terms of black and white. Oh, plan all the way to the end. Oh, think about that. No, it's planning all the steps along the way.
Yeah.
There's a balance involved, right? So if you do these little baby steps and you give yourself goals, if you have to work on your own, you're starting you're your own boss. It's maddening because nobody's pushing you. You have to create continual deadlines. I do this to myself. By this date, I have to have this much written, right? And it kind of engages your spirit. It gets your emotions going. It makes you realize you have a deadline. You have to get there. And it energizes you. Whereas that vague feeling of, oh, I want to write a book. Okay, blah, blah, blah. It's actually more daunting. There's less energy involved because you never feel like that. I call it in my war book, death ground strategy. When an army's back is against a mountain or the ocean, they fight like hell to get out of it because there's desperate and it's either win or die. You have to have that approach with your book or something. If I don't get this done by July 31st, I'm in trouble. I better hurry up and do it. So break it down and don't always every single day think of, oh my God, it's going to take so many years, etc. That's in the back of your head. You have a vision, but you have other little ends that you're continually planning towards.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think like that's the challenge, right? Like when you're writing the page, you're thinking about the book. And when you're writing about a chapter, you're thinking about the book launch. And it's like you're thinking about something way bigger than what you actually have to do right now, but it's what you do right now that's going to get that bigger thing. And I think if all you did was wake up and say, I just have to write a page today, which is that micro step you're speaking of, then I don't think I have to write a book. Writing a book is daunting and overwhelming, but writing a page or writing a paragraph, if that's where you're at, like wherever you're at, a line, like if that's the case, that baby step is what you want to wake up and fixate on. I think it's the same with anything, whether you're launching a podcast, again, I'm being lazy, whether you're launching like you said, launching a company, whether you're starting a new brand or whatever it may be. The problem is we're thinking like, I need to do this. I need to do that thing on the front cover of Forbes magazine. And it's like, that's not what you're doing. Like, this is what you're doing, right? So,
yeah. I mean, people who are great craftsmen, and I have a book called Mastery,
yes,
which I discuss the process of creating something. If you look at craftspeople, somebody who's building a house or an architect, they can't sit there and just suddenly have it happen. They have to go brick by brick by brick. They have to lay a foundation. They have to focus on the foundation, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, they have an overall vision of what the house will look like. Mm-hmm. So if you're only focused on the day-to-day, it loses a little bit of spirit. Yeah. So you need to allow yourself a little bit of dreaming. I dream all the time. I'm being interviewed by Jay Shetty while I'm writing the book. I'm on the cover of some other great magazine, whatever,
Right.
You allow yourself to have it because it gives you kind of energy.
So you need both again.
You need both. You need a balance.
Yes.
But a little bit more towards the micro ends. And then occasionally, when it's finished, I'm going to have this. It'll be wonderful because that'll keep your energy up.
Got it. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. The other one I wanted to pick out, I mean, there's obviously, as everyone knows, there's 48 to pick out. So I'm only picking 2. And we've spoken about a few of them, but you have to get the book to read about the rest of them. We have Master the Art of Timing. I find that one fascinating too, because I think today we're living at a time when people either think it's too late, it's too early, I'm not sure, it's not my time. These are the things I see on social media. These are the things I see people express. How do you master the art of timing? What does that mean?
Well, in an abstract philosophical sense, let's pull back a second.
Yeah.
Time is a human construct. Time does not exist. In the universe, it's eternal. There's no clocks. There's no beginning or end. It's just one massive thing of time that goes on forever, right? We humans have created time. So it's subjective, it's psychological. So you know the experience that when you were a child, a year seemed like a million years. Oh my God. Now a year goes like that.
It goes so fast.
It's subjective, right? So you have to understand that first, okay? So when you're excited about a project, when you feel alive and energized, then time is a much different experience than when you're bored. So you can create your relationship to time, right? So I'm not ready. Well, there's a strategy for that. You should always take action a little bit before you are ready, is the advice I give. So if you're not ready and it's really a huge task, okay, maybe wait a little bit, take steps to get closer to being ready. But several months before you're ready, go ahead and do it. Try it, because you're going to rise to the occasion. If you feel like you're almost ready and then you start, you go, but I better work harder because I know that I can do this. Whereas if you think I can never do it, you'll just give up. You don't want to give up, right? So I have in the book many examples of people who forced time. I call it forcing time. So I talk about Julius Caesar and the famous crossing the Rubicon, right? He had an army of only like 5,000 and facing Pompey, his arch enemy, who had an army of hundreds of thousands. And to cross the river means he's starting a war. And everyone's saying, it's insane. Don't do it. You'll never make it. And he goes, the die is cast. And he crossed the Rubicon. The war was on. And he knew that doing that, he would have to think every moment, give it all of his intense thinking, and he'd have to reach the conclusion. And he ended up pulling off one of the greatest military victories in history. Look at Barack Obama, a senator who'd only been in office for one term. It's 2007 or so, and he decides to run for president. Everyone thinks you're insane. You're not ready for it. No one's going to believe you. You don't have enough weight behind you. He goes, doing this step will force me to work harder to gain that energy. Yes, if he was a state representative, it wouldn't have been time to force it and try and make it happen. But he'd already had enough preparation, just enough, that he knew if he took that step, something would happen. The energy, the excitement, people would catch it. It would be infectious, and it would work. And look what it did for him. So you can be over ready. You should always take action just a little bit before you think that you're ready for it, right? So, and then the other thing is to realize that with time is that you want to feel like you're in control of the time that you have.
Yes.
Right? So I call it alive time versus dead time. Dead time is where you work for other people. You have no control over it. Your time is not your own. It's their time. They possess you. You're almost literally their slave, right? And alive time is that your own. You're your master of it. You control it. So when you work for yourself, which I think is the best position in the world to be in, although it's not for everybody, you kind of control your own time. Every moment is alive. It's precious, right? So for me, I practice this in my meditation, in my daily life, particularly since I almost lost my life a couple of years ago, is every moment is so valuable to me. That time, I could be dead tomorrow. And you have to think that way. And if you think that your time is limited, that you have things to accomplish, business to start, books to write, podcasts to start, right? You're going to force yourself. You're going to find the energy if you realize your time is short, and you have to kind of force it in a way and not be sitting back on your heels and continually waiting. So I tell people, if you have a dream, maybe stop waiting so much. Maybe throw yourself across that river and go and take the action. And if you fail, you will have learned 80,000 times more than you would have learned in business school. You start that tech startup, it fails. Don't worry about your reputation. You learned the incredible things in it. So don't be afraid of failure and be willing to always kind of force the time. That's sort of one of the art of it.
Yeah, no, that's really well articulated and explained. What changed you mentioned there, what changed for you between knowing time was limited and then experiencing it and actually feeling with it. Like, because I think there's very few people who have that experience, because for some people it literally ends up being the end from a physical standpoint. But to almost have, what does that feel like? Because I think you're someone who already knew that. Yeah. You knew that. You lived like that. You wrote this book. Like, you already lived like time is limited. I have to write books. You write phenomenal books and lots of them. Yeah. What changed? What changed in that, knowing that theoretically?
You're talking about my stroke?
Yes. Sorry.
Well, I'll end up.
I wasn't trying to be cryptic.
So you see the shirt that I'm wearing?
Yeah.
Do you see kind of a weird little jagged line across?
I see it.
Okay. Well, this is the shirt that I was wearing when I had my stroke.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I was with my wife. We were driving home, and she saw, whoa, Robert, your face is all weird. You're slurring. She was freaking out. She said, pull over. And that's the last thing I remember. I went unconscious. And the ambulance came, and they took scissors, and they cut the shirt right around there. They ripped it off me. They threw it in a bag. Then they put something in to help give oxygen to my brain, because it had stopped flowing to my brain. So months later, I asked my wife, whatever happened to that shirt? I loved it, because she'd given it to me 2 months before for my birthday. I love that shirt. She told me the story, and I was like, oh, man. And then finally I said, can you sew it together again? Because she's a good sewer. She said, yeah, okay. And so she did. And so I wear it, and it reminds me, because when I was this close to dying, there was a feeling inside that I had, right? It was a feeling that it's weird. It was almost a taste in my mouth, and there was a feeling in my bones, a kind of a softness, like I was melting from the inside out. And I could literally feel myself moving away from life in that moment just before I went unconscious, right? So reminding of it with things so now when I wear this shirt, it's like a memento mori. I can re-experience that feeling. And it's so ironic, because 2 months before, I wrote the last chapter of Human Nature about confronting your mortality. It's not the same. It's abstract. This is visceral. This is real. And people who've had much more powerful near-death experiences than I am know that you don't emerge from that ever the same. It changes you, right? So now, it was an intellectual concept. So now when I hear the birds chirping, I look out my window, the sun is shining, I almost want to cry. I'm here to see it. And I came that close to never seeing it again, or people are irritating me. No, I could be dead and they don't irritate. I love them, and I can overlook them, because they're also mortal. They're also going to die. They also have fears. It just changes you emotionally from the inside out. So how can people do that who haven't experienced death? It's not easy, but you have to make the leap from an intellectual abstract concept to something visceral and emotional, right? So even before my stroke, I meditate every morning. I would always have a practice of meditating on that moment when I'm going to die. I imagine myself, it's an afternoon, the sun is shining, and this is my last day on earth. And I can even make myself kind of cry as I do that. And I would make myself, it's something real, because we go around and we live in a culture where death has no meaning. We don't see the food that we're eating, the animals being killed. People die in hospitals, cloistered away. Whereas our ancestors, they saw it on the street. They saw the animals being killed. It had a presence. You live in this abstract world where nothing is real, where your mortality is just like something you don't even process. Get over that. Jump over that and make that leap. Make it something emotional and visceral. It's not gloomy. It's not morbid. It's liberating. Because when you think about your death and it becomes real, you realize, I don't have this much time. I better work harder. I better appreciate the people in my life. I better love them more. I better appreciate every moment that I'm alive. And it just opens you up in so many ways. So it's one thing to have it in intellectual exercise. It's another thing to make it more visceral. And that's what I'm kind of advocating.
Well, that's what I love. That's a beautiful transition into, your new book. That's how called The Daily Laws, because that's a daily habit, right? That's the only, to make that law feel real, you need to practice it daily, especially if you've not had a near-death experience. And I know that I've practiced that death meditation often in my life when I don't do it every day. I do it more when I'm making a big decision. It really helps me make big decisions. I remember when I was working in the corporate world, but really wanted to be doing what I do today, and sitting there and asking myself, like, how will I feel about this on my deathbed?
That's very interesting. I never thought. That's very,
I was like, if I stay in the corporate world, how will I feel about this when I'm 80 or 90 or 100, whatever it is?
That's a brilliant strategy.
Yeah. And then how will I feel about this if I tried and failed? And how will I feel about it if I tried and it works?
Yeah. I love
and
that.
every part of me was just like, you have to try this. Like, even if it fails, you'll be so upset at yourself for being 90 and about to die and you didn't try. And so I love that. And that's why I love the fact that you've taken out the daily laws. What have been some of your daily life changes since that moment? You told us about that beautiful meditation. Have there been other things? Obviously, looking at the birds with the sun. What else has changed daily for you, I wonder?
Well, a bit of humility.
Wow.
So, first of all, I look at people now who are old or who have a disability, and I understand them on a much deeper level. I have much greater empathy for people, not just with a disability, but people who've lost their job, who are poor, who have no control over their lives. I have greater empathy for them because in the months afterwards, I had no control over my body. I couldn't walk. I still walk in a very kind of wonky way, right?